Never been in any urban setting where there's so many different lives trying to compete for the same space that there aren't some conflicts. I think Barcelona has done a magnificent job in its urban design, the layout of the city, and by reputation it's a well-governed city.
Kalpana, what are your first impressions of being in Barcelona?
Well, the thing I found most interesting was the fact that there is this old center of the city, which is a living center. I mean, so often I think you create tourist sites where people are expelled and, you know, it's made for tourists. And I talked to some of the people there. I even found Indians and Pakistanis living there. But of course, it's too short a visit to know whether there are also marginalized communities that are not incorporated into what we as visitors see. And that is a question that always arises with cities.
Michael, is Barcelona a model city for the United Nations, or are we pushing a point a bit?
I think I think it shows what you can do to make a city an attractive place to live in. You can upgrade, you can make the physical side attractive, but also the social side. I mean, what you've done is involve the people in the process of making Barcelona such an excellent place. But just going back to what you were just asking, you do see that on the threshold of Barcelona, coming from the airport, the new people coming in, who are having to squat. So you do get a sort of image of part of a city in the south, in the developing world.
So there are problems or opportunities that both the developing countries and the First World have in common. Now, that's one of the things that you and your colleagues are going to be concentrating on this week at the UN Cities meeting in New York. Can you explain what that is about and what you're trying to achieve?
Habitat, the United Nations Centre for Human Settlements, is concerned with those two things, with housing, with shelter, and with when shelter comes together to make towns. The reality is that half the world live in awful conditions. And there's perhaps over 1 billion people living with less than $1 a day. So they haven't got access to loans, they haven't got houses, they haven't got security, and they probably haven't got access to water and services. So we're attempting to raise the profile of that. The urban development side is to do with making the cities work, with getting the traffic to flow, access to schools and clinics. Now, obviously, this is a problem throughout the world.
What can a small team of bureaucrats working for the United Nations possibly do?
We've got to actually be positive and look that cities actually can help the whole story of sustainable development. They're actually
but just to be clear, it's rhetoric rather than firm action.
Well, you have to move the
schemes,
rhetoric to action, don't you? You have to move to actually building houses and roads and sewers, providing the services that people need. And you have to highlight the problems that that you're suggesting. That it's a big wave coming towards us. And if we don't discuss it, what's the alternative?
Okay, well, no, let me come back to that in a minute, but what's different about this review of the City Summit in New York to the meeting in Istanbul 5 years ago is that we've now all begun to talk about that buzzword globalisation. And we've been asking people in the cities we've travelled to for this series of Life how they believe globalisation has affected the cities they live in.
Globalization is influencing Calcutta, but I hope it's for the good.
It was not yet time for it. We were not ready for globalization.
It will help people, to increase their knowledge and to, open the possibility to get more jobs.
It's one thing to sit here and be isolated and think you're it because the pond is so small. But now, if you say Joburg, someone's going to compare it to New York, somebody's going to compare it to London. And if you live here, you're going to have to work with those standards too. So for me, it's competition, and it's a good thing, and it's put us on the map.
Gary, isn't this a problem for trying to plan cities in the 21st century, that globalisation is creating winners and losers? They have less and less in common, and that makes it more and more difficult to have the kind of common vision that's made a city like Barcelona a success.
Well, first of all, there have always been winners and losers. I think globalization has exacerbated some trends and has resulted on more attention, more movement into cities than existed before. It's problematic in part because most of the donor agencies are still interested in investing in the rural side of the equation. In a globalizing scheme, more people are going to the urban because it's urban centers around the world that are competing with one another. It's not nations competing with one another.
I think it is a very, very critical situation because for me, globalization is the possibility to lose the identity.
Of losing your identity?
Yeah, and then, for example, in Europe is very clear. Our historical centers, in Torino, in Paris, in Barcelona, in Rome, are very small. The the scale of the cities of Europe 1,000 years ago was very small. And then we restored and we recycling the historical centers. But when we finish with the architecture of the stone, with the physical architecture, arrive the McDonaldization, for example, and arrive the Benetton, Coca-Cola, Pans and Company.
The brands take over.
And the landscape is not the medieval landscape, it's the new landscape. And we can talk about of many, many questions about it. And then in the case of Barcelona, I was very worried for the possibility to lose in the identity.
Do you have to worry about this in India, or are you grateful when McDonald's and Starbucks move